And you are watching us here on SCW, the wrestling channel. It's SCW Rewind, your throwback Thursday edition for you right here on the channel. My name is Steve, and I'm joined by George. And today we're going to be discussing WCW Monday Nitro episodes 3 and 4, just after Fall Brawl. So we've got a lot to discuss for us on today's show. Of course, we're going all the way back to the mid-90s, which is 1995. So talk about a throwback indeed. George, you're with us. How are you feeling this afternoon doing this recording?
Yeah, I'm feeling very bright and breezy. Really looking forward to doing this. It'll be good to talk some retro again.
Yeah, I'm very excited to talk about the retro stuff. I mean, we've got lots to cover today. We're going to also cover a couple of other topics as well that happened around the time with stunning Steve Austin. Of course, it's not far around the time his termination was from his contract from WCW. So we'll be discussing that and what difference it could have made to the Monday Night Wars, as we look back in history there. And George is going to be going through some of the dirt sheets and give us one or two more rumours that were around the time. So plenty to look forward to during this episode. We'll quickly touch on Fall Brawl just before we start. We'll probably go into a bit more depth when we talk about the episode of Nitro. Was you a fan of that pay-per-view?
It was okay. It wasn't very filler. I felt it was a bit disappointing compared to sort of the first episode of Nitro and stuff like that. But I get it. They're in transition. The problem is they were hampered by that main event, the way the main event was set up, and the fact that the opponents of the good guys made it really hard. The Dungeon of Doom, I think, ultimately there was a couple of good parts. I think the ending was very good. It built a really good way to the next match for Hogan and Giant. It made the Giant look $1 million. I thought again, which is important considering he was going to main event in the next pay-per-view.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, of course, we will be talking about Hogan and later on, but yeah, certainly that was a great building point, and I think that's what WCW here at this point was starting to do. Like you said, it was transitional. The pay-per-view wasn't the strongest, and that's one of the reasons why we've not taken a full episode to cover it, because like you say, that there's so much that they were looking forward to doing, but they start putting the pieces in place of the directions of where they want to go, and I think that that's what's the most exciting part of Fall Brawl, is that you can see the direction of where they're going forward, and as we go into that next night of Nitro, there certainly is some excitement there, and those storylines start to play out. So we go into the episode 3 of Monday Nitro, and we kick off with Eric Bischoff, Bobby Heenan, Steve Montgomery, Michael with the commentary, just saying we're going to get some updates from what happened last night at the Fall Brawl. We get an introduction to Pepe, who we didn't talk about in the last episode. Pepe the dog, who seems to be dressed up in a different outfit every single week with Montgomery Michael. What were your thoughts of Pepe? Are you a fan of seeing Pepe on the screen every week?
Yeah, I'm a massive fan. I think he's certainly better than the Pepe that plays for Arsenal, or for all football fans that are mentioning, that are watching, maybe.
Yes, definitely did. Although I won't mention too much. He did happen to score against my team, so I shouldn't mention too much. So, yeah, I mean, Pepe, it just brightens up the screen every week, and it gives you a little bit of joy in those outfits as well. It's certainly one for the family when you see that. It's a way of engaging, all audiences into the product. So I do like that aspect there. But we see that there's an emergency in the back. Now, we mentioned Fall Brawl, and this is our first moment here with Hogan and the Giant. Hogan was taken in an ambulance, so we hear that there's an emergency in the back. We hear the sirens. We see an ambulance pull into the arena, but actually, it's not Hulk Hogan that comes out of there. It is the Taskmaster, Kevin Sullivan, and as well the Giant. We see the Giant, who says that he claims to now be the one true immortal. 3 times that he's been in altercations with Hogan. 3 times he's the guy that's come out on top, and he seems to be, very proud of his efforts. He believes his father would be very proud of his efforts as well to end Hulkamania. That puts the Giant over very strong. Your thoughts, George, of this interview in the backstage with Mean Gene?
It was a fun segment. Anything with Kevin Sullivan at this time is gold for me. He's very much a bit like a Broken Matt Hardy, that type of character. But back then, he's just amazing to watch, and particularly the amount of effort he puts in and the way that him and the Giant. What I think was clever, they're putting the Giant they're giving the Giant in the Dungeon of Doom, which makes that stable have a lift, if that makes sense. It makes that stable relevant to a certain point. But it was a good way to start. Clearly, it's the main sort of storyline of the build of the month, if that makes sense. So it's a good move. I think it was a good way to start the show.
Certainly, indeed. And you're going to have Kevin Sullivan and expressing his character work of what he's like today. There seems to be a lot of creative freedom within that stable and within that work. And was Kevin Sullivan a big part of the booking at that point? I know he has done a lot of the booking work at points in WCW.
I know that he was very prominent in 1996. I presume that he must have had some sort of creative control, some sort of input, I believe, in the product at that point. I think it's later 96 where he does fully sort of is unleashed alongside Eric Bischoff to take over the booking and stuff. But you can tell that sort of the creative freedom compared to what was being served in the WWF at the time, it's eye-opening, it's refreshing. Looking back at it now, just to see what they were allowed to do and how the product differs. Because bear in mind, TNT at that point was very much a family-friendly network. I don't think it was one that where you would get a lot of stuff that was out of the normal, if that makes sense.
Certainly, indeed, and I agree with you. He's definitely wacky, off the wall, and it's definitely an eye-opener of what you could see in today's market. Should there be a bit more creative freedom? It seems that with different companies like AEW, for example, that we see a bit more of that expression given. But it's certainly interesting, and like you say, a strong way to start off the show. We weren't expecting a tag team match to follow this, which was the American Males, which of course is, I believe, Scotty Riggs and Marcus Bagwell. Bagwell has gone through many different gimmicks and different tag teams throughout the early 90s and seems to be a solid one here given with him. He'd not long been a part of Stars and Stripes of the Patriot earlier in the year. But they're involved they're going to take on the team, the Blue Bloods, which of course was Steven Regal and Robert Eaton. But we didn't see that tag match take place. We see Robert Eaton come flying through the curtain, and we see Harlem Heat taking him out. We believe Steven Regal was taken out in the backstage area. Of course, Harlem Heat were the brand new WCW Tag Team Champions the night before at Fall Brawl. I believe beating the team of Dick Slater and Bunkhouse Buck. We see Harlem Heat come into the ring and say that they're going to have their moment on Nitro and then putting the tag team titles on the line against the American Males. It was definitely a big twist, something you didn't expect when you see that. It almost happened so quickly. I could argue that there was a little bit of slight confusion of the tag team belts even being on the line until the referee actually held them in the air. What were your thoughts of this going into the match before we even got into the actual match itself?
It was a shock. I think clearly, obviously, based at the time, you're looking at they was meant to face the Blue Bloods, as you said. It would have been Steven Regal, and I presume that Steven Regal was probably in Japan at that point, which is why the match didn't happen. Looking at it, it was a shock. I felt the fact that no one saw this coming. It's a tag team title match to start the opening Nitro after a pay-per-view, which is exciting. I thought, looking for it for older eyes now, I didn't give the American Males a hoping chance hell of winning. So when they got the belt and they got the victory, I was shocked at the time when 1-2-3 Kid beat Razor Ramon. I was just nearly falling off my chair. I just couldn't believe they got it. But you can see instantly in the American Males team who the star is. It's definitely Marcus Bagwell. I think you could just see that he's got that room to grow and sort of progress up the card quite quickly, I felt, by watching this match.
Definitely, I agree with you 100% there. It feels almost like that the experience is really starting to show with him because, I mean, he'd been involved with Rookie of the Year, I believe, in 91. I can be wrong, it might be 92. But he'd gone through so many different tag teams and different spells on the card. He teamed with Too Cold Scorpio, like we mentioned the Patriot earlier. He's gone through so many different, different stages within WCW that it just feels like at this point now, this gimmick, you start to see more personality, I feel, for the first time with Buff Bagwell, or as he later becomes Buff Bagwell. Marcus Bagwell, like you say, he is the star of this tag team. He stands out. And like you say, they managed to pull off the shock. I mean, I didn't expect the title change either, but it certainly was an interesting way it came about. I mean, of course, Harlem Heat at this point were more seen as heels, it feels, rather than baby faces, even though they kind of had a babyface run with the storyline with the Bunkhouse Buck and Dirty Dick Slater. We see them win the tag team belts the night before. Of course, the storyline revolves around Sherry and Colonel Robert Parker. Of course, there was Colonel Parker was this sort of Texan character, the cowboy hat, the cigar, believed he could get anything he wanted, the money behind him, and he believed that, Sherry would easily fall for his charms. We'd seen them brawl for months upon end, but we had seen a bit of a twist the night before that there was a bit of kissing action going on. This sort of happened again. Sherry was going to get involved in the match. She was standing on the apron. She had a shoe in her hand. She saw Colonel Parker come down the ramp, come down, and she just sort of fell into his arms, which was a bit of a bizarre angle, if I'm brutally honest. I still find it bizarre watching it to this day. And we see that, it was going to be a pump house slam for Booker T onto Bagwell. He twists and turns that into a pinning combination, and we get the 1-2-3 and brand new tag team champions. Now, like you say, a complete shock there. With the finish, I mean, I'd like to know your feelings on the Sherry Colonel Parker relationship. Do you find it, entertaining in any way?
It was a bit cringeworthy. I think it's probably one of the most cringeworthy things I've seen with Sherry since SummerSlam '92, where she made out with Rick the Model Martel while Shawn Michaels basically looked on. I think it was definitely a bit cringeworthy. You kind of get it from the night before, the whole tag team feuding and stuff like that. But I felt it, yeah, it was unnecessary. Really, I get that they were distracted, hence why sort of it happened. But yeah, it was okay. I just felt it sort of took away a bit of the glamour from the match a little bit for me.
I would agree with you. I do find it a cringe-worthy storyline. I mean, I don't know how I would have felt of it back then, but I assume I would have found it the same even at a young age. I don't know, just that part of it wasn't for me, and I didn't find that relationship between them two entertaining at any stage through WCW. But what I will say is, in a defence for it, clearly this is probably an idea to protect the Harlem Heat, and only having a 24-hour title reign, which probably at that stage in wrestling probably was unheard of. There wasn't so many short-term reigns, was there?
No, there wasn't. I think it's very much hot potato in the belt again, which is I'm not a fan of, as you know from our other podcast. But it was okay. It's a good way to start the show. It was something different. At least they've started with a ban. It's just where they move on to next. Really, what I did like, which I thought was clever, is the way that they hinted like you had to watch Saturday Night to find out whether the title change would last. If that makes sense, whether Nick Bockwinkel was going to validate the title change. I also thought what was interesting, Steve, which I'll get your opinion of, was the way that Harlem Heat were the heels in this match, whereas the night before they'd been kind of the baby faces. It's almost like they've had like a heel turn overnight, which was a bit odd for me.
Yeah, no explanation, it feels, with that twist. And that's what I found a bit strange there. So you mentioned yourself there was the night before they seemed to play the role of baby faces, and you thought, well, going forward, that may be their role. They seem to be in my opinion, through judging, I mean, my experience is watching, obviously, the Nitros, and had been watching Clash of the Champions and the pay-per-views leading up to this. I didn't see so much of Saturday night, but it almost felt like throughout that summer, Harlem Heat were going through a bit of a transitional period of whether some shows they felt like they were faces, some shows they were hit. It was almost like they were between a role depending who they were facing on the night. I remember them at Bash at the Beach, and I felt like I was more cheering for them than booing them. And obviously, at the same time, we see at the Clash of the Champions where that feud with Colonel Parker and his stable started in the first place, where they had been feuding, I believe, with the Nasty Boys for a long time before. So, I mean, it is a bit of a mess scenario in a creative standpoint. But I guess, like you said, they're looking for the shock value. They're looking for twists and turns of entertaining TV. Perhaps it's a bit rushed, and perhaps it wasn't. It was sort of thrown together. But what I would say is it's the third episode of Nitro. I believe it's the second title match. I can be wrong with that in Nitro history, and we have a title change. So it gives you that unpredictability factor of a Monday evening, and I feel that, well, anything can happen here. I've got to tune into Monday Nitro, and certainly, as Bishop would say, every time we go to an advert, don't you dare switch the channel, because why would you if you've got a feeling there could be a title change throughout the night?
Yeah, fair point. I agree with that totally.
We'll move on anyway. We're going to move on to an interview in the ring. We had Mean Gene interviewing Ric Flair. Ric Flair seemed to be very passionate here with this interview. Obviously, with the Fall Brawl, he had a match, what I thought was probably the best match of the night, him and Arn Anderson. A very strong match between the two. A settlement of the Four Horsemen, settled within the family. But of course, we had an outsider brought into the family. Ric Flair made a key point of that you brought an outsider in to cause an interference and getting involved in the match and cost me the match. Brian Pillman was that guy that assisted Arn Anderson there, and Ric Flair was assured that he would get his revenge on Arn Anderson, but tonight he was going to get that revenge on Brian Pillman. What were your thoughts of the inclusion of Brian Pillman being brought into this rivalry with Ric Flair and Arn Anderson?
It was interesting. I really like the way that they followed on from the night before. Fantastic promo from Ric Flair, much stronger than his previous one he did the week before. It was great. I don't know if it was just me, but I was shocked that Arn Anderson beat Ric Flair, but it was clever the way they did it. And it's great that Ric Flair wants to get that revenge. You're building something that people want to see, which is clever here. I really was a massive fan of this promo. I wish it went on longer, if I'm being honest.
Yeah, I mean, that's the only thing. Of course, sometimes with this, and we'll probably talk about it a lot with the early Nitros when we do this, you look at it and say the shows are only 45 minutes long without adverts, which means probably it was only an hour back then. And obviously, if they want to get 3 or 4 matches on, a couple of interview segments on, they need to almost think about what's next, and they just have to hit the key points and then they move on. Sometimes less is more, but sometimes, like you say, you could have, you wanted more out of Ric Flair, but maybe that's the genius of the promo. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think the film with Ric Flair, he always leaves you wanting a little bit more, but I get it. The only thing I felt that sort of, they obviously had to cut it to get Luger out, which I kind of get that, but when Luger came out, I sort of groaned a bit. I was a bit disappointed, really, if I'm being honest, moving forward.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, totally. We will move forward in the second. But I just have to say, I do agree with you. Arn Anderson picking up the victory at Fall Brawl was definitely a surprise in my eyes. I didn't see that one coming either. Definitely would have had my predictions well off if that had been the case. But we'll move on to one Mr. Wonderful, Paul Orndorff will come up to next. Now, this definitely is, I believe as you would quote this, George, in previous times, was definitely glorified wrestle. It had a backstage with I don't know, even a strange character. I don't know the name of the character to be honest, but explain to Paul how wonderful he is and how he should believe in himself more. He has new entrance music. He has a mirror coming down. It's very opera-esque. You have the commentators cringing of the idea of this new music, want it to be turned off. I think it's only Heenan that actually appreciates the music. What are your thoughts of this gimmick change? Personally, I do find it a bit cringeworthy, but I do see from that point of time how that would have been quite entertaining as well, because we see characters do that in the modern day today who want to get this way of getting over with the crowd in a heel fashion by having annoying music or having some sort of gimmick that's going to wind us up. I feel that this is done quite well to its perfection, even though I perhaps do find it a bit cringy.
Yeah, interesting gimmick change, definitely. I felt the music was a bit odd, as you said. I think it is a bit like a '95 version of Bobby Roode's "Glorious," but at least that tune's a bit tolerable. I think I get it. It's a cross between the Narcissus Lex Luger and Mr. Perfect, and I get it. It's playing up on the arrogance of Paul Orndorff, which is it's fine. I think they needed to refresh the gimmick to a certain point, so I'm happy with this. I just hope it kind of leads somewhere down the line. I hope this isn't a 2-minute change of character and then it's kind of forgotten about in a month's time, which will probably happen 9-9.
We'll have to wait and see as we go through to future episodes. But he does have a match with Johnny B. Bad. Johnny B. Bad, who had a great match at Fall Brawl. He had a half an hour match with Brian Pillman. In fact, to the point that they had to go in overtime sudden death. You don't usually get that a lot when you get the time limit draws back in those days. It was just simply left as a draw. But on that night, there had to be a winner. And I think that that was definitely breaking the mold as well for WCW at that stage. But lucky been on the night afterwards here, a match with Paul Orndorff, of course, nowhere near the same sort of time given for the match. In fact, Johnny B. Bad does come out on the losing end here. He seems to go for some sort of sunset flip, but he has his legs hooked. And to the quote of Mongo McMichael, Steve Mongo McMichael's commentary, he was sitting on his head. Was a way to describe as the 1-2-3 was given. What are your thoughts on this quick fire match that Orndorff and Johnny B. Bad had?
I didn't really enjoy it. I felt that there was lots of things they missed. There seemed to be a lot of botches. There seemed to be a lot of moves that were missed, but it's okay. I get that they had to give Paul Orndorff the win, but it clearly didn't follow up on Johnny B. Bad's great work the night before. But as I said, it done what it needed to. I felt it was a filler match just to kind of fill time, really.
Yeah, it felt like a filler match, and I must admit I was disappointed of Johnny B. Bad earning himself a United States Championship match, like we say the night before, with such a great match with Brian Pillman, to only lose in minutes the night after. And like you said, there was a couple of clear botches in the match. It felt that almost a 619-esque while Orndorff was on the floor. It was nowhere near him, and Orndorff just fell to the floor. It just felt a bit awkward that moment. But like you say, he did what he needed to do. We got wonderful, more over than perhaps what we did earlier on. The gimmick he had was, I suppose, starting to get a bit more tired in WCW. He had the same music, the same gimmick for a number of years. So they wanted to clearly freshen that character up. And yeah, it delivered going forward. We go to a clip then that was filmed for the scenes of Baywatch. We see that Randy Savage was involved with that. Ric Flair was also going to be a part of that. Randy Savage doing some weights and is attacked by the Taskmaster. What are your thoughts on this segment? For me, it seemed a bit shocking, the fact that we see especially for the times that we've got a major television program, some filming for it, and we see some wrestling broad there for the likes of Nitro.
It was interesting to see a different backdrop to start, but me personally, I found it funny. It all goes back to Kevin Sullivan again. I felt he was comedic in this role. I felt the way that the weights came down, the way that they kind of got out of the situation, it was just fun. I get they're creating this feud, but the fact that you got Ric Flair there making the babyface save, that was a nice, interesting touch that probably a lot of people maybe missed. It was an okay segment. It done what it needed to do. I just felt it sort of was slightly different compared to the rest of the show, if that makes sense. It felt a bit comedic, but I enjoyed it. I found that entertaining, definitely.
Yeah, and I think sometimes entertainment is what we're looking for, and that's what we need. And of course, we need to build a program going forward, and that's what they've done with these guys. And we'll be talking about more about them later in the show. So certainly interesting. But we do get Randy Savage coming out, and it seems to be building more towards a longer-term feud. Now, it does actually say, it does talk about the Taskmaster to begin with this interview with Mean Gene, explaining how he doesn't want Ric Flair's help. Of course, they had a big feud over the summer, which went through the Great American Bash and Bash at at the beach, of course involving Randy Savage's dad, which I thought was a very, very good feud done with him and Ric Flair. So obviously Savage doesn't want that help. He says, look, thanks, but no thanks. In another lifetime, he will deal with it himself. He will get his own revenge on the Taskmaster. He says then, talking about War Games, then the night previously, we go on to this conversation of Lex Luger. He believes that there was a cheap shot that was given to him, that Luger, of course, has this hidden agenda. And we sort of then see that he's got this prediction in mind that later, when it comes to the Dungeon of Doom, he reckons there will be some new people that will be involved with the Dungeon of Doom, because his belief was a lot of people seem to be on the side that it was a cheap shot, not a cheap shot, and it was accidental. Savage was clearly it was purpose. He believes that Jimmy Hart, Lex Luger, and Sting will all be future members of the Dungeon of Doom, mark his words. We get Lex Luger, who just comes out, obviously, of hearing this, and he sort of has an issue with the fact that he's been accused of being going to be a part of the Dungeon of Doom. He says his big words from Savage. He says, look, I'm up front. I'm honest. I'm here for the title. Are you trying to say that you don't want to be a WCW World Champion? Savage says, well, look, you make a good point. I do want to become a champion. I've got aspirations of becoming the WCW World Heavyweight Champion. But that doesn't go across to the point I was trying to make earlier. You still cheap-shotted me. It gets to the point where we get the challenge made from Luger, because he says, look, let's be honest here. I didn't cheap-shot you, but this is where the big boys play. I come to fight the big boys. And Savage, there's no bigger boy than me here in WCW. The match and the challenge seems to be made, and the challenge seems to be accepted. This seems to be a real plan here. In fact, I've gone on for a couple of minutes. It feels there's been so much in such a short few minutes of that interview. It feels like there's a lot to dissect here, but clearly a bigger picture with Savage and Luger going forward as we go perhaps towards the next pay-per-view. George, give me your thoughts on this, please.
Yeah, I felt it was good. I think it clearly created real heat. You could see people were generally invested in the crowd, and I think the fact that you don't know really who to trust out of Savage and Luger. For me personally, I think watching Lex Luger as a babyface, he doesn't connect for me for some reason. I think he's so much more comfortable as a heel. So it was okay in the fact you're building a future match. It's a no-brainer really, but it was a fun segment, and I think it was positioned perfectly in the card, up the card. The positioning was perfect really for me.
Yeah, I would agree. The positioning of it was perfect. I mean, of course, we had the Ric Flair one earlier, but this really felt like, of all the three interviews or promos, whatever you want, throughout the night, this had the most mileage in it, and it just felt that, for me, this was actually the highlight of the show, because at that time, you were thinking to yourself, we're building towards a Randy Savage Lex Luger match. And of course, we mentioned it on the last show that they're giving you the big match, Hogan versus Luger. Now we can have Savage versus Luger. And you think to yourself, goodness, wow, this is incredible. When you look at the big matches you get on the other show in WWE at that point, we're getting Shawn Michaels and maybe Sid or something. But this, I don't know, for me, just Savage and Luger feels a bigger deal, and it makes you think, well, hang on, this is the show you should be watching. So from that standpoint, they've really got me invested. And like you say, you don't quite know who to trust here. So there's a lot here going in, a lot of questions, not a lot of answers. Savage has got that feud then starting as well with the Taskmaster as well. So it adds a little bit that you still believe Savage to be the face. Is Luger telling the truth, or is he not? There really is a lot of unanswered questions. It makes you really excited to see what's going forward.
Yeah, it does, definitely, that's for sure.
Okay. Well, we move on then, and I believe our next part of this is, of course, the main event. But before we do get to that, they do show footage of Fall Brawl, and we can talk about more in depth now. Hogan and the Giant in the Fall Brawl. Of course, the babyfaces pick up the victory over the comedy stable of the Dungeon of Doom, which enabled Hogan to get 5 minutes alone in the structure, the two rings and the cage over the top. This does lead to the Giant coming down to make the save a couple of minutes into that, and we do see that he does get hold of Hogan while he's got a bunch of Hogan, almost twists his neck, and it's very graphic. It's always something I find very difficult to watch when I see that, and clearly that is the angle they're going for, that there to push that going forward, and the state of Hulk Hogan going forward. Is he going to be 100% to get his revenge back on the Giant? What were your thoughts with this?
Yeah, it's creating interest, as I said, for the next pay-per-view. I think the fact they're flashing back to Fall Brawl is important. They make the Giant look $1 million, which is important. And I really think you really have got a real fear for Hulk Hogan that he's actually probably going to lose the belt, which I think if you're a fan at that age, the demographic they're targeting, it's a perfect one really for me. I think they're really painting the Giant as somebody that nobody's going to be able to stop for a while.
No, so no, it really gets those vibes of WrestleMania 3 recreated, doesn't it? With
Yeah, it
Hogan
does.
and,
Yeah.
of course, like Andre the Giant as well. Then, of course, that was at the time probably the biggest ever feud and grossing in wrestling history with that matchup. So they're clearly trying to recreate that with this, this giant that they have as someone who's very agile as well. And at that point, we look to see and talk about the Big Show in his career and stuff like that. But at this point, the giant, he's is something else at this point. He seems to be very agile for a guy his size.
Yeah, he is. I think he's very agile, and I think the stuff he can do just makes him stand out, really, back at that time.
It really does. Earlier on in the evening with Fall Brawl, and I do mention this on Nitro as well. I mean, Hogan's interview where we see the monster truck, run over the Harley Davidson of Hulk Hogan, which of course was a '95 Harley Davidson as well, so it was a brand new bike at the time. They're doing all different things they can just to show Hogan under threat here, and it does obviously lead to more storytelling going forward, which we'll talk about later in the show. But it was very intriguing. What were your thoughts for the monster truck?
It's a different way of doing things, isn't it? I think it stands out, certainly, and the fact they're building towards potentially monster trucks at the next pay-per-view, it makes sense, really. I think it's great to make that stand out. They really fix the whole loudness of the characters of Hulk Hogan and the Giant, louder than life, which is what the monster trucks are, really. They stand out, don't they? They're not just like a Corvette. They're huge. They make an impression.
Certainly does.
Impactful is the word probably I'm looking for more.
Yeah, definitely impactful, and of course, like you say, larger in life as well. Then they really stand out amongst the crowd. That you wouldn't miss it, anywhere you are. So no, it's proper exciting, and definitely intrigued to see where that story continues going forward. Main event time: Ric Flair against Brian Pillman. Not the longest match in the world, but these two do what they need to do for the remainder of the show. We do see that Ric Flair does get some revenge on Brian Pillman. Flying Brian, of course, with the figure four leg lock, gets the submission victory. Thoughts on this?
It was a solid match. I think it did what it needed to do. Brian Pillman obviously tapped out, which is great. It makes the figure four look $1 million, which was important back at that time. But it filled a good match. It filled on paper a good match. I don't know if it's main event worthy compared to the opening matches they've had, or not sorry, the opening matches, the main event they had previously on Nitros. But it done what it needed to do. I think it was a fun watch. Really, it was good to see them pay off that sort of feud quite quickly. I felt after the night before.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, of course, if Ric Flair's ultimate aim is to go back for Arn Anderson later on, they need to have the fall guy, which we see a lot of the times throughout the years. We've seen the stables where we have that second guy in the stable who seems to do a lot of the jobbing when it comes to the TV weekly stuff. So, it feels natural for me at this point. And, I mean, for what it still was a solid main event. Definitely, in my opinion, probably the stronger match on the show there, because a lot of the other matches perhaps didn't get as much time, really. So, for me, I think it's probably the strongest match throughout the whole show. And Ric Flair, of course, still adamant that he's going to get his revenge on Arn Anderson going forward. So, thoughts on that Nitro overall? What would you give us a final grade for that one?
It was okay. I think there was some good pros and some good cons. I think the biggest pro of all was the fact that they followed on from the night before with the Giant. That was genius. Kevin Sullivan was an A-star for me again. They've got new tag team champions, which was a shock, which is great. I like Shock TV. Negatives, Mr. Paul Orndorff even, Mr. Wonderful. The gimmick change probably isn't going to last. But it was okay. It felt interesting. It felt like they're clearly building stuff, continuing in the background with Luger and Savage as well.
Definitely, I would agree. They seem to be really pushing forward, and they already seem to have clear direction of where they want to go going forward. And I think that's always a positive when you see with this that they're continuing the storylines, they have a clear direction, and that you feel to yourself, right, okay, well, I'm going to stick with this because there is a long-term goal here, and that will probably lead into the next pay-per-view. But before we get on to episode 4 of Monday Nitro, we're going to just take a little bit from the dirt sheets, and I think we should start with one Stunning Steve, who obviously his contract was terminated around the time. George, can you give us more on that?
Yes, so Stone Cold, obviously, as we know him, was fired, unfortunately, back on the 15th of September. At the time, he's obviously only 30 years old, and he'd been injured. He was injured for a while. If you look back at it in future now going on with it, what a mistake that was by WCW. We may never have had a Stone Cold Steve Austin, but the fact that Steve Austin he was obviously frustrated. Obviously, at the time of firing, he had a lot of interest, like people like Japan were in for him, ECW, WWE at the time. But it's just a shame, really, that they never ticked on. Can you imagine if we would have got Steve Austin in WCW? I think he would have been an interesting watch. We wouldn't have got Stone Cold for sure, but I think he clearly would have probably still been up the card eventually. Such a solid worker as well at that time.
I would completely agree. I mean, Austin had a lot to give. It just seemed that, the thing I always remember from hearing from other things since was that Austin was believed that or told that no one would ever purchase a pay-per-view for a guy in black trunks, just those plain black trunks, and that people were interested in someone like him, and how he went on to prove them wrong. I do agree with you. Had he stuck around, I do believe that perhaps the mid to upper mid card may have been his, where he could have ended up. But I don't think he would have got the same break in WCW. I think clearly it's proven over time that he made the right decision, because he wasn't just the biggest star in the other company. He was arguably one of, if not the biggest star of all time. And it just goes to show what a big mistake it was there. But I mean, Stunning Steve had some great times in WCW. I was such a fan of his work watching him. And obviously, looking back, watching recently, knowing what he had done in his career going forward afterwards, when he was part of the Dangerous Alliance, the Hollywood Blondes, he'd been, a television champion for a long time, and as well as United States champion as well. Stunning Steve had done a lot of great things in WCW, and it was a shame really to see that he couldn't really make his way to the main event within WCW, because I do think he would have had a lot to give. Granted, I don't think we'd have ever got Stone Cold Steve Austin, but I think we'd have still got an interesting Steve Austin character that could have definitely carried the company had he been given the torch. But sadly, it just wasn't to be.
Yeah, definitely. Really was sad, but we were lucky in the long run. WWF obviously benefited in the long run, which was, for me as a WWF fan, was positive, really.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, growing up, I was the same with you, a WWF fan, and what was their loss? It turned out to be our gain eventually, and you've only got to look back at the Attitude Era, and so many glorious moments with Steve Austin, and let's be honest, I don't think any of us would ever trade any of them for the world. So
I've got sort of one last thing. Sorry, Steve, to interrupt you. I'll ask you a question about Austin as well while we're on the subject. So WCW obviously fired him when he was injured. He was out at the time with an injured tricep. What do you make of that, though? That's pretty callous, isn't it, based on the amount of years he was there, obviously, as Stunning Steve Austin and other stuff he'd done at that point?
Well, I mean, the question is there, what does that send a message to the rest of the locker room? If you get injured, you could get fired. It's probably not the best way. I mean, I don't know if his contract was running out, or if did he just get fired, or was he, had he many years to go, or I don't really know the situation with that. I know he was let go, but was it just not on re-sign?
To be fair, he was on a fair amount he was on quite a lot of money, obviously, for the contract stuff. I don't know about the length of contract, but I presume there must be something in there, like a non-compete clause or something. Like, not if you're injured, you can't wrestle and stuff, that you'll get released. But for the money, I'm guessing WWE at that point was saving money, and obviously planning to spend it on other people, which obviously worked in the short term. But it's just a shock. I was just a bit surprised at how callous WCW seemed by firing Austin at that time.
Certainly, indeed. Well, you could see the bitterness as well. I mean, I know you and I are both fans of ECW, and we're not here to talk ECW on this one. But I mean, when you look at the work that he did in the short time he was there in ECW, Steve Austin had a lot of bitterness towards WCW, and that really helped him a chance to develop and help his character work and take some jigs at Bischoff. Clearly wasn't a happy camper leaving. And no, I agree with you. I think it was fully callous. I don't think it sends a good message to the locker room, as well as just Austin himself. And it probably gave Austin that chip on his shoulder that he needed to when he was in his next, chance he could make a difference, which was WWE 96. Yes, granted, Austin probably didn't have a long reign in it, but Austin certainly made the best of it. And as soon as we got Stone Cold, Steve Austin come, sort of by mid-96, we got a King of the Ring winner. And let's just say the rest is history, because, he made the difference. And like we say, that chip on his shoulder really helped him take it to the Monday Night Wars and eventually get the better of Eric Bischoff and get his revenge.
Yeah, certainly. I agree perfectly.
You had some more inside stuff for us that we were to talk about before we go into episode 4.
Yeah, I read something absolutely outrageous, which I couldn't believe, which I'm going to tell for the viewers. That I don't know how many people aware. So we're going to go into maybe a spoiler for Halloween Havoc 95. So anybody that hasn't seen the show may want to just turn off for about a minute or two. But what it is, obviously, in Halloween Havoc 95, WCW debut a character called the Yeti, which is pretty comedic. It fits with Halloween Havoc. It's got certain sort of people will sort of think of it as one of the funny WrestleCrap moments of all time. The actual rumours at that time for the character at this point was the Giant Gonzalez to come in, or the one-man gang, aka Akeem. So if you think about Giant Gonzalez, no offense, how limited he was in the ring, I don't know what WCW were thinking. Obviously, at the time, they're signing people like Chris Benoit, Dean Malenko, Eddie Guerrero, and yet they were going to go for Giant Gonzalez as if that was ever going to bring ratings. Imagine the WrestleCrap that could have been if he was the Yeti, so to speak.
Of course, yeah. Well, I believe he had a stint as well before WWF in WCW.
Yeah, El Gante. He was El Gante.
Yeah, and I mean that was not a successful spell there. So I mean at that point I felt he was even more limited by the time he got to WWF. It just didn't seem to really click for him. But no, I would have hated it if that had been the guy that would have been under that mask really, or under that costume, shall we say. But yeah, definitely interesting rumours of what were going around at the time. I think One Man Gang would have perhaps worked out a bit better. He certainly, as gimmick-wise, I preferred him as One Man Gang than I did Akeem, but certainly was able to at least put matches together. But yeah, very interesting stuff really of what was going around at the time. What would be your thoughts? Who do you think was the best one for this?
What, out of the two?
Yeah, those two, yeah.
You've got to go with Akeem / One Man Gang. Surely the Giant Gonzalez, he's so limited. He couldn't really do anything. Judging by his WWF run, where he made the Undertaker look absolutely atrocious, really, I felt. I think it was a crazy move, really, looking back at this. But funny enough, the One Man Gang does come into the Federation in later years. I think he may come in 96, 97. But it was a bit of a shock for me. I'm just glad it didn't happen. But the person they put under the mask, for everyone that wants to know, is they actually put somebody called Ron Reese under the mask. And he was in Raven's Flock down the line, which happens. But it was an awful gimmick. I don't know what WCW are thinking. I don't know how WCW thought that this was going to help elevate that main event, if that makes sense. I just think it was comedic wrestle crap, probably total wrestle crap, if that makes sense.
Certainly want to definitely. I mean, I must admit, I have seen when this character is brought in, and for me, yeah, the less said, the better. I can't say I'm a fan of it personally. I don't think much of that character, that gimmick. And like you say, I don't know what people were thinking at that point, thinking that this is going to bring ratings in. It almost feels like in '95 that a lot of really bad gimmicks come involved. Not to mention one who probably will get mentions in future episodes here. The Renegade was brought in, obviously, in the '95 and was almost like a rip-off of the Ultimate Warrior. And
yeah, he was.
Just didn't connect at all. The guy had a decent look and wasn't so bad in the ring, but the gimmick was just awful. And even within a couple of months, I mean, at Bash of the Beach, the guy was being booed but heavily on the beach. I actually forget who he was facing at the time. I remember that the heel he was facing was the guy that everybody wanted to win. So that's not a good thing if you're trying to be one of the biggest baby faces who had just come into the company at the time and had been helping out Hogan only a couple of months prior. So it just goes to show that there were quite a few bad gimmicks going around at the time. But I suppose if you don't try something, you don't know. But yeah, I mean, for me, the Yeti, awful gimmick. Really, really not a fan of it.
Yeah, definitely. Let's move on. It's causing me nightmares. I'm joking.
Let's not put people turn people off. We will go to Nitro episode 4 then. I'll tell you what, talk about interesting gimmicks. We're going to be talking about the Disco Inferno. Now, I must admit, this guy makes me laugh every time I see him on Nitro. Of course, this is his first appearance on Nitro at this point. Him versus Alex Wright in a match. And of course, it's Das Wonder Kid. Now, we've got the guy that does the dancing like this against the guy that does this all the time. It's certainly interesting viewing, definitely an entertaining match. What were your thoughts of this?
This was a fun opener. I think this is exactly what an opener needs to be. I've noticed they're kind of pushing Alex Wright this time, considering he managed to not get defeated by Sabu. He's now winning here. He's on a little bit of a push, but it was fun. I think the Disco Inferno music when I was a child was the staple of Nitro. I remember watching it on TNT when we used to have an hour show and it was all edited at that point. Obviously, it was only an hour then. And all we used to get was Disco Inferno's music and it would take up quite a large part of it. But no, fun, a very fun gimmick. I think it is entertaining. It is definitely comedic, though.
Very comedic indeed. And I must admit, we see a lot of bad gimmicks. I must admit, this is a fun gimmick that just seems to connect a little bit with these two. And certainly with some chemistry in the ring here, I thought the match was a fun opener. Like you say, backside got Alex Wright the victory. And like you say there, maybe a slight push going for Das Wonder Kid once again as we're going to the back end of 1995. We've got a backstage promo from Hulk Hogan. He's in a neck brace. And he says that he's still not missed a workout here, even though despite having the neck brace, he challenges the Giant and he's offering to face him with monster trucks and also to put the title on the line. Clearly, this is the direction then going forward for Halloween Havoc.
Yeah, definitely. I felt it was a comedic value. It makes Hulk Hogan look like the hero everyone wants him to be. Really selling the neck injury, which was great. They're still following up with that. It was a comedic thing. I think the fact that they're sort of Hogan referred to the Giant as the big nasty Giant just says it already. I felt it was really comedic, basically.
Yeah, it certainly was indeed. And we've talked about Hogan and Giant a little bit already. So I mean, we're both interested to see where it's going to be going forward. So yeah, we hope to see more of that rivalry develop and talk about in future weeks. But we've got Savage and Luger. We've got a recap of their face-to-face on the interview segment the week before. We've got them once again now. And Luger believes that Savage just doesn't respect him. You can go with war with each other, but sometimes you've just got to go to war against each other. Luger versus Savage is booked for the following week, next week on Nitro. And Luger promises that if he doesn't win, he will leave WCW. Now, he's just walked in the door. Big statement making there that he could be leaving. It just feels like high stakes here, a match that's a must see.
Yeah, so they're basically in essence booking a pay-per-view caliber match for Nitro next week. It's an exciting match. It's a big match as well. Bear in mind at that time Nitro had lost the previous 2 weeks, so they're trying to get clearly people back on board to watch it. But I enjoyed this. They're really building up this, and the fact they're putting that stipulation of loser leaves. Yeah, wow, you have to see this match when it happens.
You certainly do indeed. I mean, the thing is as well, when you look at that, you say that that's a way to bring ratings back in as well. Two big names. We mentioned that it's a big match in '95 that certainly is bigger than perhaps what you get on the other show. So yeah, this has got win-win all over it. One thing I'm not sure is a winner, though. I'm going to be honest with you. Sergeant Craig Pittman. It doesn't do anything for me, this gimmick. He's in the match next against Kurosawa. Now, Kurosawa, Japanese superstar, arm breaker. In his debut, he broke Road Warrior Hawk's arm at the Clash of the Champions. We see the comments talking about that all throughout this match. We see that a German suplex, though, into the pin does give Kurosawa a victory over Craig Pittman. It feels the Pittman gimmick is not a long-lasting one. It's just one of these glorified gimmicks that's going to go through the time.
Yeah, definitely. I think Kurosawa looked $1 million here. I think he really held his own. I think the hype job the commentators did as well. They really hyped him up to anybody that wasn't watching, the fact that he broke the arm of Hawk, as you said. But it's important that he got the win here. It makes him look like he's ruthless, and it makes him look like he's pretty unstoppable. But Craig Pittman clearly at the moment he's a mid-carder. He's at best, if that makes sense. I think clearly he's there to elevate people, despite his win at Fall Brawl against Cobra, supposedly. But it was an okay match. It just sort of did what it needed to do, really. I think it elevated Kurosawa, which is important, really.
Certainly, and I agree with you. He looks very strong in the build-up as well for that. So very interesting to see where that will go going forward. And hopefully it builds to a Kurosawa Road Warrior Hawk match in the future, because maybe them two can go at it and Hawk can try and get his revenge.
I have got one kind of thing about it. Sorry, before we move on. Sorry on that one. Sorry to interrupt you again. Another thing, I don't know if you found this during this match. All the commentators mainly were talking about, other than Kurosawa, was the monster truck match. It was almost like an excuse, this match, just to promote that monster truck challenge. Yeah, it got a bit distracting before we move on for me.
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, sometimes in WCW we do get this. Even some of the high-profile matches, they seem to put it to the wayside to talk about Hogan and the Giant at this stage. And I would agree with you. I do think it does. It takes away, and sometimes it probably is a sign, really, that not only Pittman but maybe Kurosawa, they're not going to be destined to be future main eventers. They are people that are just filler and there to do a role. Kurosawa currently being built, but probably someone being built to put someone else over that they want to really put over later down the line. That's how it comes across watching that. It's disappointing.
Yeah, definitely. 100%.
Definitely. We'll move on to Mean Gene. Mean Gene got a prominent role here once again now, an interview in the ring with Arn Anderson and Brian Pillman, gloating that Ric Flair cannot find a tag partner to face them in a tag match. What goes around comes around. You've done everyone wrong, and I was the one who had your back, was said by Arn Anderson, and obviously you've got no one now to cover yours. Really strong stuff I felt here with these two. I actually like the idea of the Arn Anderson-Brian Pillman tag team. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think it's a great tag team. I felt Brian Pillman's delivery again. He's $1 million. He was the 95's answer to Kenny Omega for me. He's charismatic. He's excellent on the mic. He's a loose cannon at that point, even if you can see it. The fact you put him with Arn Anderson, I wouldn't say Arn Anderson's one of the best talkers, but they work well when they complement each other together. I think the fact you're getting even sort of Anderson sort of laughing and you're getting Pillman doing the woo, it's really creating a sort of heat for them two. You really want Ric Flair to get some sort of revenge, don't you, as soon as possible again?
Yeah, you certainly do. They've done a great job of building this up here, and obviously we know someone else is going to be brought into the mix with the idea of a tag team match. So, and it gives that idea of who's that mystery partner going to be? Who will be the person that will step up and help the Nature Boy?
Yeah, definitely.
There's a lot. There's a lot to look forward to with that feud. I really like it. And I do agree with you, by the way, Phil. Just quickly before we go on, so much charisma. And it feels like his strengths of bringing out in a tag team. He really gets to flourish. He seems to not go so far in the singles reign in WCW, but he was with the Hollywood Blondes in the tag team. Now with Arn Anderson, he just feels there's a lot of strengths there. We get a clip going forward after this. Once again, the Taskmaster and Randy Savage from the previous week. We've talked about that already. But then we get the match, of course, that we were looking forward to with these two, Taskmaster and Randy Savage. But it's pretty much 2 against 1. The Zodiac, who of course is Brutus Beefcake, is at ringside. It leads to Savage getting DQ'd though, because he actually takes out both of them in this sort of scenario. We do see though that once the flying elbow is done, I believe the Taskmaster moves out of the way and we hit the Zodiac. The Giant comes to make the save here for the Taskmaster, destroys Savage. We see the Jobbers come out from the locker room. The Giant takes them out as well. Alex Wright is coming back down just to put the Giant more over by putting the chokeslam on him. Luger comes down as well, and he stands over Savage. But before he can really gloat too much, the Giant also attacks Luger with a chokeslam. But the Taskmaster is not happy that the Giant chokeslam Lex Luger. Take that of what you will. So much in this segment in such a short space of time. Let's dissect it one by one. George, start off by giving me your thoughts.
What an interesting match and sort of segment. I think the fact that they built up on what they did last week with the whole sort of Baywatch incident, as we said earlier in the podcast, I think it was a great match. I think the fact you're getting Zodiac run out, which is fine. You don't want your biggest people to come out. Savage obviously destroyed him as well, which makes sense. And then the fact you're getting the Giant come out, that once again they're making the Giant look $1 million. You're then getting a load of a plethora of jobbers running out, people such as Frankie Lancaster, people such as Mark Starr coming out. But then they put Alex Wright out there, which I wasn't a fan of. I thought they should have kept That's Wonder Kid safe. I thought they did earlier in the show. It was interesting. The fact you're teasing Lex Luger potentially joining Dungeon of Doom as well. I think it's all very, very interesting the way they're building this week by week. They're really teasing Lex Luger going to a heel turn, which for me, I think it has to happen. I hope sort of going forward, watching the shows, it's going to happen. Fingers crossed.
Yeah, definitely. But like you say, his stronger work seems to be as a heel. They tried it. I mean, before with Luger to be that strong babyface in WCW.
Yeah.
Didn't think it quite worked in the early 90s. Obviously, we'd seen his work in WWF at that point in the to try and be the next Hogan. Didn't quite connect. He's coming as a sort of in-betweener here. It's which side of the coin is he going to be? Let's hope he has that heel turn, because it really feels like that it would complement this rivalry with Savage going forward perfectly.
Let's be fair. The Giant at this point has been, as I said, pretty unstoppable. He's basically destroyed Hulk Hogan. He's destroyed Randy Savage. And he's now destroyed Lex Luger. So he's looking pretty unbeatable. He's looking like the Fiend before the Fiend lost. He's looking like nobody can stop him, I think, at this point.
Agreed. Yeah, totally. I mean, it feels like that when it comes to it, no one is a match for the Giant. So, yeah, I think at this point they're doing a great job of building him, like you say, perhaps not protecting everyone else as well as they could. But I think the point is to really set home that the Giant is that big threat for Hogan. And like you say, no one is exempt, even like if it's Alex Wright, Lex Luger, Randy Savage. They're all going to take the fall because they really want to make the Giant look like the guy that is going to destroy Hulk Hogan. And like you say, we still got twists and turns going throughout this story, and loads of people interacting with each other. It'd be interesting to see how it is going forward. But to finish off the evening, we do have Lex Luger against a member of the Dungeon of Doom, against Ming. We've got the Taskmaster at ringside. Hogan is announced during the match that he will be at Nitro next week, so we get that announcement for a match. Also, one of the things you brought up earlier there, perhaps taking away from the match that we're watching in the ring, just to make a Hulk Hogan announcement that could have been perhaps made before the match or after the match, but had to be made during. We got a short match though between these guys, and of course Luger not at his best, and Ming picks up the surprising victory. But of course, he uses a spike almost to hit Luger in the throat to get that 1-2-3 victory. What are your thoughts with this?
Yeah, it was a strange main event. I think the fact you're getting the Min beat Lex Luger, that was to me was a shocker. I think, and once again we're getting shocks here. It goes against the run of the grain. I know Luger's been beaten down. It's a fluke win, but what benefit will this Min winning? It doesn't do anything for me other than potentially create maybe a rematch at Halloween Havoc or something. It was a shock to me, and the fact that you're getting sort of Luger to be KO'd, it almost made Luger look weak really, which I wasn't a fan of. I get he's been beaten down, but it doesn't. You're not putting the right person over it by Min going over, in my opinion. I think it was a big mistake. I don't think it sort of helped it in any way, really.
No, certainly not. I mean, when you look at it, I mean, they come back to WCW, and I actually don't believe on Nitro that he's picked up a victory at this point, has he?
I don't believe he has. From I wouldn't like to say factually, but you're much more factual with information than I am with this. But you can see why sort of WCW are losing sort of shows, these kind of shows week on week, if they're sort of serving main events like that. It's very flat compared to the first main event we had. I think it was a flat way to end the show. I get that you're building towards Randy Savage, Lex Luger next week with a lot of stakes, as we said earlier. But for me, it's not like Min's going to go and win the world title, is he? In 6 months' time, it's just a. I felt if you're looking at wins and losses being important, it was I wasn't a fan of this one.
No, certainly not. It felt that yes, it puts Ming over, but I do think at the right time, like you say, it was the wrong decision to make. Luger for me had to go over here at this point, even though we'd already taken the choke slam. I just think at this point you make Luger strong going into the following week. Savage has been protected. Luger needs to be protected if you're going for this monster main event the following week.
Agreed, 100%. I think they would have been smart to do a DQ finish if they didn't want Luger to sort of not win. I think that would have been much more clever. But hindsight's a wonderful thing. We can look back through older eyes now and see what could be good and what couldn't be good. But once again, it was another sort of good episode of Nitro. But you can see sort of they're going to have a lot of work to do to try and sort of stop WWE going forward, if that makes sense.
Certainly, indeed. I mean, the thing is, what we will say is that those 2 episodes of Nitro we've talked about, a hell of a lot of information to give in such a short episodes. I mean, there seems to be always something going on, and I think that's what makes Nitro so interesting. They do really fit out the time really well, especially instead of having, I know later on they go on to do this, but having 3-hour shows where you're desperate to film, find time and put stuff in, 5 hours over the week. But I mean, at this point here, I mean, it's 45 minutes. You've got to get your showing, get it on, and get your point over. It's a good job of doing it. And at this point, Nitro, very exciting. So for me, I give this episode also a thumbs up, even though there was probably a couple of bits that you could turn around and say maybe were a bit on the negative side. But I think that's everything we've got to cover this week. George, is there anything else you'd like to mention before we call it this week?
No, it's been another really fun episode. I hope the viewers enjoy it as much as we've enjoyed discussing it. But as you said, if you get anybody that wants us to talk about any of the more obscure shows, we do have access to WCW Prime, WCW Saturday Night, and also WCW Worldwide. If there's any particular episodes you want us to cover as a one-off or additionally, we could probably do that as well. But I appreciate everyone for watching again.
No, we do appreciate everyone watching, and we will be doing Nitro again for you in a couple of weeks' time. But what we are going to do is, obviously, next week it is WrestleMania week, so we are going to take a flashback at WrestleMania 15 from 1999. It's going to be our next episode doing this together, George. We're big fans of the Attitude Era, and it's going to be interesting to really, one of the high points where WWE has control here over WCW. It will be interesting to get the thoughts over that WrestleMania.
I'm excited. I've been watching 99 religiously, and I've followed it all through in real time to certain points, so it's going to be fun to watch it and review it with you, definitely.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to doing it. And for everyone that is watching, make sure to keep an eye on the channel. The Q&A will be coming this weekend. WrestleMania predictions will be going up on Tuesday next week. That's right, Tuesday. You can keep an eye on for me giving my WrestleMania predictions. And as well as that, like I said, we'll be back with another Throwback Thursday next week. So plenty to keep an eye on the channel. Please like, share, and if you've not subscribed to the channel already, make sure to subscribe now. Keep up to date with SCW. We've got you covered here, and we're going to give you a lot more content coming over the next few weeks, especially while we're stuck currently with the lockdowns. It certainly gives a lot of content for you guys, just to give you something to watch if you're enjoying your pro wrestling, want to watch the retro stuff, want to keep up to date with everything going on right now. We would like to keep you covered here on SCW, so please keep with us. But that's all from us anyway. Thank you for watching. We'll see you next time here on YouTube. George, thank you as always for being on the show.
No problem. Thank you for having me.
Anytime, man, anytime. And we're, like I say, like, share, subscribe. You've been watching SCW, and this has been Rewind.